For those of you in attendance at City Hall, if you would please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you. First order of business tonight is to consider the minutes of the last regularly scheduled meeting, which was the 2nd of September, 2020. Does anyone see any additions or strikes that need to be made in those minutes from the commission?
None for me.
Okay. None for me.
Okay.
No.
None for me.
Commissioner Young.
If that is the case, could I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes from 2nd to September 2020?
I make a motion to approve the minutes from September 2020. Commissioner Rock.
And do I have a second, please?
Yes. Commissioner Young, second.
Okay. All in favor, and we will poll this, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. It passes unanimously. Okay, moving on. Codes Administrator report. Kurt, please.
I don't think Kurt joined. He was going to be joining remotely, but we do not see him on yet, Chairman Grant.
Okay.
So if he pops on a little bit later, we'll get him before the end of the meeting.
That's fine. We can come back around to it. Then we will move on. City Manager's Office. Barack, do you have a report for us tonight, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I just have a few updates since our last meeting. One is about Nottingham, a couple of updates from Nottingham. We did sign a real estate agreement with Wendy's. So Wendy's will be the other user at Nottingham. And also we did have a groundbreaking last week for the Nottingham part of the project. The contractor, Amino Brothers, will probably start within the next week or so with the construction, with the utilities, stormwater, sewer, water, and whatnot. A big chunk of the street improvements in that street will probably occur Q1, Q2, 2021. Also, I don't think that they're online. I wanted to introduce the representatives of IBTS, Doug Moore and Laura. They will be replacing Dave, and they've been assigned to us by IBTS, and they will be the planning consultants taking over from Dave, and I don't see them online, so we'll probably introduce them at the next meeting in December. If they join later on, we'll probably introduce them. Also, Modern Manufacturing, the company out of Canada that expanded into our industrial business park, they did get their building permit. They're making improvements, and they're still scheduled to open sometime January 21. That's their goal. And it's a beehive of activity at the industrial park. They're trying to get their building up and ready. Jeff Rhodes, the city's management analyst, has been working on the CARES Act funding. We have two programs that the city created about 2 weeks ago, the Utility Assistance Program and the Small Business Assistance Grant. Those funds were earmarked for those two programs, and the deadline for the Utility Assistance Program was last week, and the Small Business Grant is this Friday. 2020 street improvement projects that included 8th and 9th Church Street intersections have been completed. Hopefully, if you drive through Church Street, you will see, or you'll not notice the bump that were on those two intersections. Also, Blue Jacket Park has been completed. This is the trail from Blue Jacket all the way to connecting all the way to Hawthorne. That's the additional trail that's part of the KDOT Transportation Alternative Grant that we received about 2 years ago. Also, Jeff Rhodes, working with our city management fellow, Lauren Freeman, they've submitted KDOT Transportation Alternative Grant today for sidewalk project connecting 10th, from 10th and Church all the way to Peach Street on the south side of Church Street. So hopefully we'll be successful. Hopefully we'll be awarded that grant so that we can build the sidewalk because it's really needed. Also, it's part of the agenda, the urban growth area boundaries. So Dave and I will touch on that when we get to old business, but we wanted to update the planning commissioners on that issue. But we'll provide more information and more details when we get to old business. With that, I'll answer some questions you might have.
Any questions from the commission for Barack, please?
Hey, Brock, just a timing thing. So you think we'll be eating Wendy burgers before we're pumping Casey's gas?
I didn't hear the question, but everybody is laughing, so I don't know.
He said, will we be eating burgers before pumping Casey's gas?
If that is your preference, yes.
Any other questions for Barack, please?
I don't have any other questions.
Okay. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to our public comment period. This is for non-agenda items only. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes, and no action will be taken. Seeing as I am remote tonight and Tim is the eyes of the commission, is there anyone that you see in the audience who would like to come speak?
There is no audience.
Okay.
And Chairman Martin, there was none received electronically either.
Okay. Thank you for that, Eric. Okay, then we'll move on. No public hearings are scheduled, and moving into new business, we have the draft of the comprehensive plan. Dave, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commission members. Tonight I'm joined by Vanessa Spartan. If you don't know the name, I may have mentioned her when we were doing other presentations of the comprehensive plan. But Vanessa's been my right-hand person throughout this project. She has been a great help. Much of the quality and content of this document is because of the work she's been doing behind the scenes. Vanessa's worked with me now for, I don't know, Vanessa, what about 20 years? No, I don't know. It's been a while.
Since 2006. So.
Yeah, so it's been quite a while. She originally was on our staff at Gould Evans. She is now a planner with the city of Tempe, Arizona. So she's joining us remotely from Arizona tonight as we go through this presentation. You will not be required to take any action tonight. So that's the good news. What we're doing is providing you the draft of the comprehensive plan. At the end of the presentation, we'll talk about the timeline because this will come before you again in November for the formal public hearing and then your adoption process going into City Council, and we'll go through that timeline a little bit. So, Barack, I know we're playing with the slideshow here, so I'm going to let you catch up for just a second, see what we've got going here.
Can you all see my screen?
I'm seeing the screen, but you're in a different place there. I don't know. You need to get it to the presentation view.
And Dave, just to correct you, you said November. I'm assuming you mean coming before us in December.
It's in December, correct. That's your December meeting. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Brock, you might just put it into the full screen mode down there, or presentation mode down there in the lower right-hand part of your screen, the little icon that's got kind of the arrow under it. One more, two more, there you go. See if that does the trick. There we go. Yeah, so that is interesting.
I think it's normally like if it's on a split screen setting, so it's showing the presenter side instead of the public side. So I don't know if up on display settings, if that would, if you click on that.
Give it a second. Sorry.
We can still see it okay.
Brock, go up to the top up there. I think Vanessa had it. There's in the middle where it says display settings. Drop that down. Let's see what it says.
Swap.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
There we go. All right. Okay, took a second, but we got there. Just real quickly for tonight's presentation, I'm going to let you know we're going to kind of give an overview of the draft and the content that's in it. We'll talk a little bit about the public input and going through any draft revision process, and then the approval and the adoption timeline. So we can switch the slide then, Barack. As you know, the comprehensive plan is a policy document. It's a blueprint for decision making. It is not law. You're not going to be adopting this as an ordinance, or the city will not be adopting it as an ordinance under Kansas law. This is a guideline or guidebook, if you will. So what will be asked of you as a planning commission when you get ready to adopt this, to adopt it by resolution. That'll go to the city council, and then they will adopt it also through the process. Kansas state law requires that. This is an update to the planning horizon of 2040, so this is an update of your previous comprehensive plan, and it addresses the intermediate and long-range needs of the community. I think, as you know, the last comprehensive plan was updated in 2003, so it's been quite a while since this document has been looked at, and it's kind of interesting. Some communities will sit there and say, well, nothing's really changed. Well, Eudora has changed in 17 years, and you've got development on the horizon too. And so this is pretty timely that we go ahead and take a look at this plan. Go ahead, Barack, and change. What I'm going to do tonight, I'm going to go through a couple of these items, and Vanessa's going to help guide us through a couple of the chapters also. But essentially the way the document is set up is 5 basic chapters. The context and framework, then you have the growth element, the mobility element, and the service element, and finally implementation, which actually for you all and for the city is probably the most important piece, because this is where the plan becomes actionable. And you're going to see us come back to that point throughout the presentation tonight, but we wanted to make a point of that. The appendix portions are really the things like the existing conditions report. You'll remember it's been a while, but the existing conditions report was presented to you all, oh gosh, I think we were talking about 10 or 11 months ago when that was presented, and you had a chance to look at that. That'll be in there. The survey and public input responses and results are there. Things like the city-county planning jurisdiction agreement and urban growth area all be in that appendix. So those are technical pieces. The 5 chapters are really the focus of the plan itself. Brock, if you want to change slides. So when we look at those 5 chapters, what you're going to see as you read through it and you take a look at it, Chapter 1 is really about the vision statement and the values supporting that vision. And this graphic that Vanessa's created here It was really intended to talk to the idea that these things are all linked together. The vision is a very broad look at where you want to be, and essentially as you move through the values, the statement of the community values, you head into the goals, which are kind of intermediate steps that you're taking as you make those actions that are recommended in that Chapter 5 piece. So when you think about Chapter 1, it's really a broad aspirational chapter talking to the vision itself. And then those goals are those intermediary steps or statements, aspirational statements, and finally the actionable statements. And that was a critical part of this in talking with Barack and Jeff as we were finishing up the draft. They wanted to make sure that we had a very action-oriented plan for you. Okay, Barack. So I am going to, I think I'm going to go ahead and talk to this first chapter, and then I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa when we get into the growth chapter. Is that correct, Vanessa?
Yes.
Yeah. So very quickly, the context and framework is really the introduction to what the plan is about. And it's going to just provide overview information. What's intended to do for the public or for developers or people who are interested in the community is to give them an understanding of the process you went through, the area that you're looking at, and then basically that idea of how the public was involved in this process. And that's really important. That makes this document a very viable document. If you pursue grants, for instance, the idea of having a public involvement process that provided input that fed into the vision statement, fed into the values, and that you're pursuing that many times helps with your grant applications. So next slide. So we did do a public involvement process that seems long ago. You know, this is pre-COVID, and we had a whole plan for how we were going to approach the public. And we started in January and February holding the town hall meeting. We had a survey, an online survey, which really turned out fabulous for you. It was amazing the number of responses that we got in that survey. You see that there's over 900 responses to the survey, which is phenomenal for the size of community that you are, and that we had that much interest. A lot of that had to do with our ability to access social media and also some of the electronic communication methods with various groups. And you're going to see as we talk about the public input period that comes up here in the next few weeks, we're going to try to access that same approach with the public. So hopefully we'll get just as much response from them as they take a look at this plan. We held focus group meetings as well to talk about the community vision and, as you can see, other components of the plan. This element, this piece of public input or involvement was really key to setting the tone for the vision and the value statements. Go ahead, Barack. So as you can see here, in the initial vision, we kept with a theme that you all already had in your slogan, this idea of Eudora, a place to grow. But the key in this was there is a desire to grow, but while maintaining that small town character. And this is not unique. Many small towns, that's one of their concerns, is they really do like how a small town feels, how people interact with each other, the scale of things, and the quality of life of a small town. And what happens with growth and what creates some of the fear is some of that character gets lost many times with a growth approach. So the idea here in the plan is really to balance those things as we're thinking about growth in the future. You have areas of town that can retain that Main Street feel, for instance, and you got that in your downtown area, but you also have new growth areas that have the opportunity to present another character that's out there. Those value statements support that whole idea of what the vision is, striving to grow while retaining core values. You see that in there. That is Eudora, a place to grow. And these were the value statements that we focused on through that public input process. And you can see downtown development was important, getting back to the river and the rail area and reattaching to that and making that kind of an interesting area for things to happen. Better connections in the community, and you'll see us talk about that, especially with mobility. I think there you'll see us talking to that idea of how do we connect places and prevent kind of a north-south divide, if you will, across K-10. How do we overcome that? And then finally into the neighborhood elements, infrastructure, and then communication and entrepreneurialism. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa, and Brock, you can switch the slides.
So the chapters that I'll go over are what is typically considered the planning element. So these have a structure to them where we first go over the introduction of what's in the chapter. We go over those details of it, and then we end the chapter with goal statements. So this chapter, the growth chapter, is really focused on land use and development. So it starts off with the introduction of that context. It goes over the urban growth area policy and how that is one of the biggest guiding points of the update and the changes in the plan. It goes over the updated land use plan. It incorporates the 2010 economic development plan, as well as some housing assessment work, and then goes over the growth goals. The map on the right is the urban growth area map that's part of the plan. You can do the next slide, Brock. So knowing that you all are planning commissioners, I realize the land use plan is a significant part of what you do. So we provided a side-by-side map here to show you. The map on the left is what's in the new comprehensive plan. The map on the right is what was in the minor update that occurred in 2005. So that's the most recent adopted land use plan, is the map on the right. The biggest thing that you'll see is that by incorporating the urban growth area, what was your extraterritorial jurisdiction, your map becomes more focused. So the limits of the old map and the new map are a tighter area. Additionally, the land use plan aligns with those urban growth area policies. So the area in green is an urban reserve policy area, similar to the language of your urban growth area. The yellow area is considered the lower density area. You'll see that what is called the medium density area seems like a broader area, and it's because it's a range of densities that are pretty common in your housing market type. That's where you're seeing probably the biggest growth and demand that's occurring in the housing market. In areas that were formally identified, not all the areas, but one particular area that was formally identified as a mixed-use area, that area, it's at the 2100 road interchange that was proposed. That area changed to a higher density residential land use with medium density residential around it, specifically because KDOT findings after the comprehensive plan said that interchange isn't really feasible. It's the proximity to the existing one, whether or not the demand is there, plus the river, the floodplain. And then as a city, you have to think about, if you build an interchange, are you going to get the economic development around that area if you have floodplain and a river and all those other factors? So that's an adjustment in the land use plan. What came out of the 2010 economic development plan was a focus on commercial node type of development. So how to concentrate commercial development in targeted areas. And so what you see is that reflected in the land use plan, the existing commercial areas, and then some broader, what I would consider kind of like outlined areas, showing potential areas for that to expand. And then in the old plan, the business park and industrial park were two separate land uses, but they were very similarly described with very similar zoning classifications. So we merged those together to allow for some flexibility in the proposals that come in that eastern area of the city limits. And then the last bullets really put at what were the strategies in the economic development plan and how do they get embedded in this land use plan. So there were citywide strategies. There were strategies specific to the downtown and central business district. One of the things that was added to it was this idea of fostering a little bit more innovation and expanding that central business district area to the north a bit towards the river. The Nottingham area, as well as the highway commercial area, the East 10th Street area, and creating what would be an eastern gateway for the city. And then the idea of what could be neighborhood centers as residential development occurs over time. Next slide. So this is just a sampling of the growth goals. There's 20 of them in total, and that is a quite narrowed down list from the old comprehensive plan. So what we ended up doing is we consolidated goals that seemed duplicate or redundant of each other. Anything that was potentially too aspirational and we wanted to make it actionable, those got shifted back to the implementation section. So while this seems like a lot of goals, having 20, the growth element's a really important element. And so we've really tried to hone and refine that. So some of the examples that we listed here, along with your urban growth area policies, the idea of promoting contiguous development, focusing on retention expansion of existing businesses, and then promoting new businesses or institutions that support your community goals or meet the market demands that were identified through your economic development study. There's a unique opportunity that's arising that we're still kind of witnessing, is that there's a growing surge in teleworking and remote working, and there's a unique opportunity for smaller communities like yourself that's not right within a large metropolitan area. And so there's a potential opportunity to really capitalize on that, and that's something that the city should continue to look at and monitor, and you all should look at opportunities like that as they come along. Dave already mentioned the idea of connecting the downtown to the river. That really came out of the public involvement and focus group conversations, this idea of you have this asset right outside of your downtown, but it does feel disconnected, and how is there an opportunity to reconnect that through either investment decisions, promotional materials, or your different downtown events. Creating a gateway destination in the East 10th Street corridor through the development that occurs and through the city's investments in the corridor. Encouraging reinvestment into the existing neighborhoods to help with the long-term success and vitality of residential development across the entire city. If you focus on continuing to maintain good neighborhoods, then all neighborhoods, right? And then with the new residential development that comes in, there is a variety of price points or market segments that need to be fulfilled within that housing area. So looking at a variety of density, sizes, and price range to meet those demands. Next slide. The mobility element is perhaps one of my favorite elements of comprehensive plans, and that's because it's an element that the city has a lot of control over. It's the largest land asset that the city has typically, and it's where you spend a lot of capital investment dollars. So there's a potential within a transportation network to really transform a city, and that was reflected in the public involvement statements as well, where people talked about having a way to get around to their daily needs other than just by car, having recreational outlets, and a way to improve some social inclusion and connectivity within the community. Also, a big part of the transportation network is making sure that you have orderly development and that you're moving both people and goods, right? So it has to serve a lot of functions. And then the third bullet that's over on the right is the idea of integrating with local, state, regional, and national transportation systems, and that's how you really pursue those outside funding sources like the Transportation Alternatives Grants that Barack mentioned earlier. So the mobility element starts with an introduction, like the other chapters. It talks about your transportation system evolving from one that focused heavily on car use, and then also adds the pedestrian bicycle component. And not that you don't have sidewalks or bike paths, but there's disconnections that are occurring. And so then there's a pedestrian and bicycle network part that's in this chapter. There's a discussion about transit service as a future service. That came out of public input as well as in the economic development study, the idea of potentially having commuter service at the Church and K10 interchange area. The demand isn't there currently today, but as you grow, it's something to continue to monitor. And section 3.5 is specifically about the street network, which is a big part of managing the transportation system. So that section's kind of long, I would say, compared to a lot of other sections. And then we end on the mobility goals. I included the graphic on the right to show that, you know, within the right-of-way that the city owns and controls within a transportation network, you have the ability to, in essence, squeeze in the pedestrian and bicycle things that the community spoke about. And that would be part of the implementation goals of doing this, not only through capital improvement projects, but also through private development. So next slide, please. So these three maps are the three primary maps in the mobility element. The two left maps come from the Lawrence Douglas County NPO. They've done a lot of work on the bicycle and pedestrian element, including doing sidewalk inventory work, looking at defects within the ramp network and where there are gaps. And then they also identified a bicycle network and what they considered priority corridors, both in the bicycle and the pedestrian network. From my experience, whenever a regional government calls something a priority corridor, that means that they're more likely, potentially, to support or get behind or score those corridors well for outside funding. So that might be where you're going for, outside funding for some of those projects. Those might be the more competitive corridors. And then on the right, so, yeah.
Vanessa. Hey, on those, you said they did the bike, define the bike areas. Who is they again? I'm sorry.
Sorry, the Lawrence Douglas County NPO. But when they did that planning work, they actually looked at the Parks and Trails Master Plan for Eudora. So it does integrate well with the existing Parks and Trail Master Plan that the city had as well.
Okay, thanks.
And then, we were talking about the growth element before. The map on the right is about the future street network, and that's an important one as you're looking at growth and development, how the transportation network expands as you continue to grow. The solid purple lines are existing arterial streets, the highest classification of street. The dashed purple line, there's really only one. It's along the K10 corridor east of Church Street, and that would be a frontage road or a backage road, depending upon the development pattern that's used there. The orange lines, the solid one is the existing collector streets, and the dashed are the future collector streets. And this is really built mostly from the previous comprehensive plans with slight adjustments, I would say, to make it align well with the MPO plan and the Parks and Recreation plan that we had saw as well. Next slide, please. So there's 10 mobility goals in total. This is just a sampling of them, but some of the key language on it is focusing on safety and access for all transportation system users, maintaining the existing system while expanding the bicycle and pedestrian network, addressing any sort of system inefficiencies or safety issues, particularly with some of the streets that don't meet the functional classification standards, leveraging your local tax dollars or private contributions for a match for outside funding sources, focusing on the vision of the transportation system as you do capital improvement projects or through private development, and then expanding the transportation system in concert with the urban growth area policies, as well as other public and utility service expansion. I think the next slide is back to the service element. You go to the next slide. Yes, and Dave, that's back to you.
So as we've built this framework of land use and development and mobility, as Vanessa's been talking about, the third primary element here is really about the services that you provide within the system itself. And you can see these are focused on public services, not necessarily private services or private development. So the idea of how do we now, with a growth pattern and a land use pattern and a mobility network, strategically link or put together our public services and facilities. So again, the consistency part of this, and you're noticing the same pattern over and over, the way we've broken each element up, is that basic introduction and then getting into these what I'll call functional pieces or subsegments of each element. And that makes it an easier usable document for citizens as well as for developers or others interested in coming to the community. So part of those next sections is really looking at what kind of public facilities and buildings do we have out there or do we plan out there, the parks and recreation element, as well as public utilities and the overall service goals for the area. You can see down there with the minor bullet points the idea of this is where we want to be cost effective, we want to be quality oriented, and we want to make sure that things are coordinated and that they're easier to maintain in the long run. So as we put these little systems together and start looking at the networks, it's a real important component about it. It's not just where something is located, but how does it tie or leverage off of other parts of the community. Next slide, Brock. And here again, you have the example goals. You can see that there's actually 14 of them. We've pulled just a few of them for you to see here, just like the other slides, just as a representation of what's there. And you can see they're relatively broad in nature. But again, the idea of coordinating service and infrastructure improvements, you want to make sure if you're going to be working on a segment of road, if it's something where you can take an opportunity where you're doing a water project or a stormwater project to also do a road project. Sometimes you can leverage funding at that point, and you're also maximizing the benefit or the investment in that part of the community. There was an emphasis, again, on public safety services. I don't know a comprehensive plan that doesn't have a goal that desires quality public safety services or strong public safety services. So that's one of those goals that's almost in every comp plan we do. Proactive mitigation of safety hazards, again, through planning and design, not waiting till a hazard shows up. This is that part of how do we proactively place elements into the community where we're taking care of issues or we're identifying issues early and addressing those at that planning design stage and not waiting until after it's being used. You can see the word preserve, protect, natural assets, open space, and scenic features. From development impacts, you do have some of those elements. And so you want to be very careful around floodplain areas, areas of vegetation, some of the topographic features that you have in some parts of the urban growth area as well as the community. So we want to make sure that people understand that those are dealt with differently than a relatively flat farmer's field where you're developing. So we want to be careful with those things. Vanessa's mentioned before the idea of gateways and gateway corridors that reflect the character and image of the community. That's an important element. As you start thinking about Eudora in its context, you have some things in place already that set your tone and character, and it's real easy to point to your downtown area and say, okay, that's a character element, but how do you get some of that character visibility out towards the interstate? So things like you're doing with the Nottingham development, for instance, it isn't just about the development. That's why there's been an emphasis also on the quality of architecture or what we're reflecting there, because that's that character piece, that's that gateway piece. When people come off K10 who may not be from the community, that's where they're going to get their initial impression of Eudora. And so you want to set a very positive impression in these gateway areas and gateway corridors. Supporting the diverse needs of the community with quality recreational opportunities, you have that potential to do that, and you have that potential to even leverage some of the East Lawrence area, if you will, and I say East, Central and East Lawrence area, to utilize some of those recreational opportunities that are out there. And then finally, promoting that healthy community with pedestrian trails, connecting people to parks and natural spaces. Again, connecting people was, I think, was one of the major themes, Vanessa, that we heard from, again, the public input, this idea of how do we physically connect ourselves, keep our community feeling like one place. And trails is that place where you can really do that. Next slide. The implementation piece of this, I'm going to turn this over to Vanessa very quickly, but in Chapter 5 now, this is where the rubber kind of hits the road, if you will. Those goal statements are nice. They feel good. They're aspirational. We find that most people will sit there and say, yeah, we need to do those things. But then it's about how do we do it? It's one thing to agree on a vision. It's one thing to agree on value statements. It's one thing to agree on the aspirations and the direction you like to head. But then it really comes down to, can we do this and how do we want to approach it? So this implementation section, again, won't speak too much to the organization, but it includes an implementation matrix, which we're going to go over a few of those example pieces of that matrix, if you will. Describes some citywide actions, but then also has some actions that are devoted right to certain geographical areas. So that organization should be helpful in organizing your thoughts. For instance, if you have development interest in one of these areas, it's easier to go to that section of the implementation section versus trying to hunt for it in a long list of actions. And so we really like this kind of approach of how we go about these things. Go ahead and put the slide there, Barack. And here again, you see that triangle. I want to make sure we emphasize in the presentation for all of you. If in your reading of the plan, you're not seeing how vision and values lead to goals and actions, then we need to know about that, because that's something that we're trying to intentionally hit here, that you can easily follow that vision and see how actions are supporting all of these elements. Some of the things that have changed with the implementation side of this, from the standpoint of what was in the old plan, the list of actions, those that were completed, have been removed. We've looked at things like where there were duplicative statements or different things that in the previous one, it repeated itself 2 or 3 times. I think we've got a better job here of really focusing in, getting it into one place. Again, we've moved aspirational statements to goals. We've refined the implementation statements into actions. We've provided a cross-reference for those planning elements, and we've identified implementation actors, which I think the next slide is where we start identifying those. I'm going to go ahead and switch the slide, and Vanessa, I might have you pick it up on this one. We were talking about that earlier, but I'll let you do this one because you're going to get those other ones too.
Yeah. So the old comprehensive plan did have the actors listed. So a lot of those are similar with some refinement. As, you know, organizations changed or certain ones went away, that sort of thing. So you can see a list here. These first bold letters are considered the abbreviations that you'll see in the tables on the following slides. And then over here on the right is the time frame. And you'll see in the matrix it's short, mid, long, and ongoing. And short is really meant to be within the first 5 years, right? What are some easy hit the ground running things that you can do right off the bat? Mid is supposed to be within the 5 to 10 year horizon roughly. And then long term is anything beyond that 10-year horizon. And then ongoing is just stuff that you just need to keep doing all the time. Yeah. So next slide.
I was going to say, Vanessa, before we flip, well, Barack already did. Before we flip too far, one of the things that both Vanessa and I were talking about this earlier, and I think what we want to make sure that everybody understands is while we look at these short-term, mid-term, and long-term periods, it's a method of organization and a little bit of prioritization, but you may get opportunities that you can't pass up. A funding source comes online that allows you to do something that we originally identified in a 5 to 10 year time frame, and you've got the ability to leverage that today. It may fit very well in here. So we want to be very careful that you don't get too focused on the time frame. It is meant to help you get there, but as we know, conditions can change. And I will add the other thing that we talked about. This plan does not plan for a second pandemic. We'll just put that out there right now. I will tell you there was no long-range plan that probably was ready for what we're going through, and it's hard to plan for those kind of events. So when you think about timelines, understand this isn't about success or failure. It's about pursuit at the end of the day. So when Vanessa goes through these sections, keep that in mind that you may get some things done, and they may get done in a little different order, and it may not come together exactly the way we're showing it. But as long as you're moving forward and you're heading towards that vision and you're heading towards those goals, that's what's going to be important. So I just wanted to say that, Vanessa, and I'll let you carry on.
I think that's perfect. You know, and hitting that point home, the reason why we provided a time frame is really so then you have interim milestones, right, to pursue, that you don't get around to 17 or 20 years later and think we didn't get through this list or we didn't revisit this. So that's the idea with the timeframes. But they are milestones that, as Dave indicated, things change. Your actions may get reprioritized, or you might decide that that action statement needs to change. That's why a comprehensive plan is not a legal document in the sense of code. It is considered a living document. So you can make adjustments in the actions. The vision and the values should hold strong, hopefully. Next slide. So this is just an example of citywide implementation actions. There's 51 of them. And what I would say is that, as Dave indicated, we separated citywide and then into kind of the targeted areas of economic development activity. What you'll find sometimes is an implementation action that's citywide might also get repeated in a specific target area, and that's intentionally, to Dave's point earlier, that you might just flip straight to a subsection area and look at the East 10th Street area and figure out what the actions were there, rather than having to flip through all the different pages and actions. So this table is showing you what the implementation matrix looks like. So this is just a sampling of the first 5 action statements under the citywide one. So what you have is an action number, you have an implementation action statement, you have a correlation to the planning element. So if you need to go back to the goals to understand what was the meaning behind that action statement or the reasoning behind it, you can go back to the goals and look at those again. The agents are listed, or the actors are listed as far as the implementation process. The short, mid, long, and ongoing timeframes are identified. I think also when you're doing your review, if you think those timeframes need to be adjusted, I think now is the time to think about that, and then of course you can adjust it later, but we can do it now in this process also. So an example, I'll just go to the action number 3. So create, implement gateway plans that identify your strategies for capital improvement and adjacent to private development, including streetscaping, landscaping, and wayfinding signage, to determine if a gateway overlay district standards are needed. You'll see that one repeated in locations like the East 10th Street section. So that's related to both the growth element and the mobility element, because that's spending of public dollars from the capital improvement side. So you'll see several different agents or actors involved. The idea is that within the first 5 years, you really start to hone in on those areas and what all needs to be done and who are the parties that are helping to get it done. So that's why it's in the short range plan. You go to the next slide. So this is for the downtown and central business district, just the first 5 of 24 action items. Looking at one of them as an example, item number 5 is one that actually is related to the adjacent neighborhoods, not specifically adjacent to the downtown area, but it talks about in the economic development plan that the downtown also serves as a commercial node for those adjacent neighborhoods. So 5 says promote and support infill and redevelopment of housing in and surrounding the downtown as a means of building a stable local support network for the broader variety of downtown activities. That aligns with the growth element. It has 3 agents. It's a midterm horizon goal and an ongoing horizon goal. Next slide. In the Nottingham area and also the overall highway commercial area, part of a larger area that's drawn on the land use map, we have a total of 13 actions. There has been a lot of work done in this area with Nottingham, with the design standards, with other things. So there was quite a few that were in the previous plan that we were able to either knock out or say, keep doing it. It's an ongoing effort. So for example, item number 2 is utilizing your K-10 overlay district standards for the development in the K-10 corridor. So that's just an ongoing item because you already have the standards. So that's an example of something that it's not per se a milestone you need to get to right now. It's something that you'll be doing over time. Next slide. In the East 10th Street area or the Eastern Gateway area, there's 8 actions, so a lot less, but that's also because we talked about the idea of having a gateway plan for that area to better understand all the needs that are over there and all the parties involved in that area. So that's why there's maybe less actions. There may be more actions added later as you really dive into that area. So one of them, as an example, is item number 1. We'll just say implement a gateway plan through the application of development regulations and public investments in the gateway area. And then that is an ongoing effort. Next slide. So the idea of neighborhoods and neighborhood centers was something that really got hit on in this new iteration of the comprehensive plan more so than the previous plan. And that's really to adapt to, you know, some of the public input that we heard, but also what we're seeing in the housing and commercial market and what's happening with master plan communities. And so this section has 20 action items, and it really is, you know, I would say probably one of your largest growth areas is the single family and medium density residential development that you'll see continuing to come to Eudora. So, you know, one example is action number 3, utilizing the planned overlay district to permit large-scale infill development of different forms and densities to coexist with your existing residential neighborhoods, and then to promote those infill projects that meet the standards, diversify the city's housing stock, and maximize the use of the existing infrastructure investments. And that's an ongoing action item. I think that might be the last of my slides. You go to the next one, and I'll turn it back to Dave.
I was just going to say, since I've talked about this triangle twice, I didn't know if you wanted to add something from your perspective as well, because we have been emphasizing, again, this is the 3rd time this particular graphic has shown up for you. And again, it is one of the guiding elements for us that's so critical for this plan, and I think that's what you'll like about this. So Vanessa, did you want to say anything here about that?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that we find in comprehensive plans is that your vision and your value statements should be enduring. Those don't change. Your goals may slightly change or refine, maybe not as much. The actions are where there's potentially change that will occur over time. Markets change, things shift, city and council priorities shift and change. So, you know, it should be interpreted as a living document, but really focus on this structure and especially the vision and value statements. And if you feel like those aren't right or need to be refined, that can occur. And then, you know, just kind of working your way through the process, knowing that those actions are intended to be interim milestones that are leading towards the vision for the next 20 years. And I would
tell you, you have 2 critical things that are coming up. If this gets adopted, which we are hoping for, right, that's the positive side of this, is that in December we'll have it adopted with the City of Eudora. You will have, and the Planning Commission has the responsibility each year to revisit the plan and take a look at it. And that's where you can look and see, are we pursuing actions or are we not pursuing actions, or has something changed in our value system and we want to go ahead and adjust or tweak our goals and actions a little bit. So it points directly to what Vanessa's talking about. And that's a state statute review requirement. So just doing that once a year helps maintain this. The other thing that's coming into play pretty quickly here is the 2020 census. Once that demographic information starts hitting the books and you will have access to that, there's going to be some needed updates to this, especially when we start looking at the existing conditions pieces that are in the appendix and sitting there and going, okay, how have our demographics really changed? Now we've got that official documentation, if you will, of where we're at, and it's relatively new. It'll be about 2 years old by the time you get it. But when you think about that, it becomes critical to sit there and say, maybe the community has adjusted a little bit and some of these goals are out of date anymore. Or we may be well on our way to seeing that goal coming to fruition, and we better emphasize a few things. So when you think about implementation, again, we want to make sure we're tying it to that overall vision and value set that's there. And I absolutely agree with what Vanessa is saying. You know, it's going to be in the action, a little bit in the goals where you're going to kind of focus. The values and visions you don't anticipate to adjust in a wide, or I'll call it in a broad way, very frequently. Usually the community retains those over time. So as you're looking at it, remember it is a living document. I think that's something that as a planner of 30 years experience, and Vanessa's got about 20 years experience in. We look at it, and that's the biggest failure of most communities is they adopt something like this, and they don't maintain it, and they don't look at it, and then they get 20 years out or 15 years out, and they go, this is not serving us well at all. And they have to start over from scratch again. So anything you can do to keep this thing active and alive in your decision making and also in the revisiting of it is going to be critical. So let's go to the next slide, Brock.
Hey, Dave or Vanessa.
Yes.
This is Commissioner Stewart. Can you touch on a couple of things, clustering and infill? So with infill, does that mean we need to be more amenable to spot zoning? And with clustering, that's just the first time I've seen that term used. So if you could just expand on that.
Yeah, I think Vanessa and I will both kind of do that a little bit. Infill, it's interesting. Sometimes as a community, you get too focused on what we'll call the greenfield development, which is the new development, right? That's where the community stands outward. You get brand new development. And what happens is the interior of the community, you find yourself ignoring some things. And I say ignoring, they just don't get the same attention. And so infill development is really something where you have to strike a balance here. You want to look at how do we utilize underutilized property, okay? So it may be a vacant parcel within a neighborhood. It may be a transition area where you have several parcels or a large piece of property that just hasn't developed. How do we look at that so that it fits into the area better? And I'll use an example here. One of the things when I was working for the city of Lenexa, I was asked one time about City Center here at 87th and Renner, which is a brand new development. It was taking forever to develop, but people were committed to it. And when I was asked about it, they said, what do you think about this? And I said, I think it's going to take care of itself. The market is attracted to it. But I said, what my concern is the I-35 corridor, because that's your older corridor and it's starting to age. And I think it's the same thing here. You have to have that due diligence of finding how do we implement guidelines for infill that are going to work within its context and maybe very different than your new growth, but it promotes reinvestment into the older areas of Eudora. You want to talk to the clustering, Vanessa?
Yeah, I would also say part of the infill idea is that sometimes you might have a lot that doesn't maybe meet setback standards or things like that. So you've got to look at some exceptions and variations you're willing to provide. And it's really important with the infill development, the ability to capitalize on existing infrastructure that's already there. You don't have to build new water. You don't have to add new electrical or new streets or other things like that. So that's part of the reason why infill is actually a pretty efficient growth strategy. It also allows smaller developers to enter into the market that maybe can't do the large master developments. And so that's where infill development really helps from an opportunity standpoint. With the cluster development, so I think some of the language we've used is really more focused on infrastructure efficiencies and clustering certain types of activities. So then, the size of the water line or the sewer line that you're providing is adequately sized to a commercial area or industrial area, that sort of thing. However, cluster growth and development is actually an economic development strategy about putting certain types of uses together that they generate activity around each other. And I think you're hitting on a point that maybe we could expand upon that a little bit more in this document to kind of describe the benefit both from an economic development standpoint and an infrastructure service standpoint.
And the one thing Vanessa mentioned that I want to build on just a little bit because it triggered. If you all remember a while back, it's been a while, but when we had the individual that wanted to expand, I believe it was an old church building that they were living in, and they wanted to expand that. It was on Church Street up here at the north end of town. And we made some adjustments to the code to allow for setbacks or setback variations that was comparable to the tone set by that by that block, if you will, those block spaces that were there. That's the kind of infill thing that Vanessa's touching on, is that ability to sit there and say, we want to promote that reinvestment, but we want to be sensitive to the character that's already there and established. So how do we find that balance and fit it into those sections of the community? Does that help answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay. So, Brock, let's go to the next one. So what's coming up on this, so everybody knows, the next kind of steps here, the public notice period is coming up. We'll do a press release and social media post. Jeff is going to help us. Jeff Rhodes is going to help us with that. Leslie helped us the first time around when she was still with the city of Eudora. So we're going to follow a very similar process for getting the word out, and actually that's going to start very quickly here. We're going to be asking for comments to be provided in writing via an online survey through November 24th. The reason we're cutting it off on the 24th is that gives us our Thanksgiving holiday to basically prep things for the packet that has to come to you in December. So the timing, if we can get people engaged very quickly here over the next about 3 weeks, a little under 3 weeks, if we can do that, get the kind of response that we're looking for and see what's there, what we will do is maybe make some tweaks to the draft during that period of time. So that'll be coming up. Then we will not only work to address those comments, but we're also going to place the document, the online survey. All of that is accessed through the city's website page. That's what's going to get promoted to people. You can actually go there. It's set up now, correct? And I think Jeff's on this call too. So if Jeff wants to verify that, or Vanessa, my understanding is that this link is active and it's ready to go. So they will be able to access the draft plan that you have tonight, as well as the online survey. Let's go to the next slide real quick, Barack.
Jeff just said on the comment or in the chat that the survey and draft are live now, and we will be sending out the Facebook post.
Okay. So he's in good shape there. Here's the timeline that we see over about the next month and a half. Tonight's your kind of work session, or actually introduction, review of the draft plan. Again, the idea to get you used to how it's organized, some of the content that's in there as you're looking at it. A public hearing notice will go out tomorrow. We have to advertise the public hearing for the next planning commission at least 20 days in advance of your next meeting. So this will go out. It'll get published in a timely manner and be ready to go for December. During the 5th through the 24th, that's your period of time to review the document. It's also the public comment period during that period of time. We would love for you to get comments to us as soon as possible if you have them. The sooner we get those, the better. We do plan on, during that 20-day period or so, we're going to be checking in probably about weekly, Vanessa. Isn't that what we were talking about this afternoon? About weekly, to see what comments are in there, to see if we're seeing any red flags or commonalities where people are seeing some things where maybe they disagree, or they're reinforcing some things, or would like to see some tweaks or better explanations. So hopefully we're going to keep that kind of running record, so at the tail end, when we're trying to put this all together, it's a little bit easier process than waiting until the end of the comment period to get those things. So I would tell you, if you can get us something in the next couple of weeks, I think I was targeting at one time around the 16th or something like that. If we got your comments back through Jeff, we can start working on those when we get those together. So there's no problem there. This Monday, we'll be updating the City Commission. It gives us an opportunity to kind of get them oriented towards what's going on, as well as another promotion piece. If we're online and we're doing this same kind of discussion, the public hopefully will hear that as they look at the City Commission meeting. As said before, the 24th is when the public comment period ends. We will be in front of you at the December meeting, which is December 2nd. There will be a public hearing at that point that will have to be run. The public comments will be part of that input that you'll get, but if people did not get us written comments, that's when they can come and partake in the public hearing as well. So it'll be an open public hearing at that point, with the hope that we'll be adopting a resolution for the plan, and then that would go to the City Commission on December 14th for their consideration. Again, you can follow the project. There's the website link there on the slide. And I think everything's there. Vanessa, did I miss anything on timeline overview, any of that stuff? So with that, that's kind of the end of the presentation. We've gone a little longer. Some of it was because of technical things. Some of it was just some ideas and thoughts where we wanted to emphasize some things. But certainly if there's other questions from you, we're here to answer those questions.
Any questions from the commission for Dave or Vanessa?
I don't know if that's good, Grant, or not. It's awful quiet.
I'd say, curl up next to a fire and read it with a, I don't know, a beer or a glass of wine or whatever you partake in.
Yeah. Case. No, honestly, I would hope that there aren't many questions because it's such a well done document. So thank you from all of us for all your hard work.
Well, and I want to go ahead and thank Vanessa also for this. For those of you who don't know, I talked about she's in Arizona and Tempe and that, but her hometown area is Kansas City. She's from the Bonner Springs area, so she's got some roots back here, which were very helpful in understanding some of the smaller community issues and things like that. And she was very interested in helping on this project. So.
Yep. Thanks, Dave.
Great. Fantastic. Well, as said before, there will be no action taken on this item. And with that, we will move on to old business, which is the urban growth area. And I know, Dave, you alluded earlier that maybe both you and Barack will tag team this old business for the commission.
Yeah, I think Barack, you may want to take the lead on this because you've been engaged with the county the most in the process oversight. And then if there's questions, I'll kind of jump in. If Barack's still there.
Yeah, I'm still here. Commissioner, this is, I think, a conversation that we started about maybe 2 years or a year and a half ago. Procedurally, after you all recommended the boundaries, we went and presented that recommendation to the City Commission. The City Commission approved it. And then we were to work with the county to formally ask them to adapt what your recommendations were. When the county met, we met with them, David and I, in a work session. They were going through their comp plan as well, all their regulation changes. So they worked with us to essentially tweak what we had in terms of the policy language that we had developed, as well as the map that we had to match what they were working on. And what's in your packet, I believe, is the final. Let me see if it's there, if we can share it. What you're seeing there is the Tier 1, Tier 2, and the urban reserve, some of the languages and the verbiage that working with the county staff, they said would work for them, and providing some clarity in the policy document as far as what would happen in Tier 1 and Tier 2 as well. So we claim that verbiage with the county to make it align with what they had in their planning documents. Following that conversation, the county commission did meet with us as well as their staff to formally adapt the designate our UGA and also adopt an interlocal agreement that they had to approve, and then the city commission had to approve to make our UGA formal. And that interlocal agreement was approved by the city commission at the last commission meeting, and it will be sent to the Attorney General's office, the Kansas Attorney General's office for review and approval, and that will complete the UGA process that we started about a year and a half ago. And they will be able to respond to some of the technical questions that you might have. Dave, if I've missed anything, feel free to add to it as well.
Grant, I think the key in here, if there's, as people are thinking about if they have questions or not, I think part of the key in this too is the coordination between the UGA and the comprehensive plan piece. So when you're looking at this, we're integrating this in because as we look at the growth area for you all, the key is we want to be coordinated with Douglas County to ensure that property is not necessarily subdivided in that tier 2 area in a rural format, which then prevents growth of the city in the future. You know, there's always that concern with those 1 acre, 3 acre, 5 acre type lots, those piano key lots, and some of those configurations. And so the idea in this UGA is really a policy guidance where in some ways what the county is doing is they're kind of deferring their subdivision regulations to meet our requirements so that the property can be annexed into the community with the development. I think that's a big step for Eudora to have that county cooperation and willingness to do that to help preserve your growth area, your immediate growth area for sure, and then to allow us at least to identify these reserve areas where hopefully what you see out there is subdivision that won't be much more than at a density much greater than 20 acres per per unit, if you will. So it's a good step forward, I think, for the city of Eudora. It's going to bring people to the table to have to talk about how infrastructure gets expanded and how we fill some of the gaps that are, in those little nooks and crannies of the city limits right now.
Again, this is just an update. If you have any questions, there is no action that's needed from the Planning Commission. We wanted to make sure that you all were aware that we did finish the process that we started about a year and a half ago. And we, like we always do, want to make sure we inform you when the process is complete.
Any questions for Dave or Barack?
Nope, not for me. It looks close to what we saw earlier, I think. So.
Commissioner Rock, I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dave and Barack. Obviously, there's no action that needs to be taken on this. And with that, we'll move on to the calendar and our next Planning Commission meetings set currently for Wednesday, the 2nd of December, 2020 at 7 p.m. and then Wednesday, the 6th of January, 2021 at 7 p.m. Not too far away. And hopefully everybody can make it to those meetings. We might still be remote, but it seems to be working out pretty good, and everybody's staying safe, so thank you for that. With that, the meeting is complete, and I just need a motion for adjournment, please.
Hey, before we do that, this is Commissioner.
Yes, John.
Can I answer a question? Yeah, I guess I kind of missed where's that urban planning document that we need to scratch up and review? That's on the city website? Or will we be doing that at a future meeting?
Yes, it's in, Commissioner Stewart, are you talking about the UGM map or the presentation?
Oh, no, the presentation.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Eric can say that he will email that to you all.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And Jeff did put the full planning document on the website as well.
Yeah, that's what I was asking about. I'm sorry. Yeah, the full planning document.
And
so were you wanting to get a paper copy of the document as well, so you could edit from that perspective, or is the electronic okay? That's what I was going to clarify.
Well, do you like the red pen effort? Because I'm an old guy, so I like to scratch things up. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'll look at it. If I need a paper copy, I'll find out how to get one.
Yeah, the best way would be to probably coordinate with Jeff, isn't it, Barack?
Yeah.
I think, Johnny, I think you had stepped away and Jeff messaged in that he's getting that all posted online, so should be able to have access to that.
Yeah, and just for clarity's sake for everybody, this is Jeff Rhodes, the management analyst. The complete comprehensive plan and appendices are included in the meeting packet, both electronically and we can easily print that out at City Hall if necessary, and then there is a link to an electronic version on the website as well.
Okay. Any other questions? Hearing none, can I please have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
This is Commissioner Stewart. I motion we adjourn the meeting.
Okay, I have a motion from Commissioner Stewart for adjournment. May I have a second, please?
I'll second. Pringle.
I have a second from Commissioner Pringle. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, no opposition, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
So, recording.
Yes.